It was the peak of summer, and I had just finished my second year of college. Needing a break, I decided to spend the summer with my best friend Josh in Texas. Josh and I had been friends since childhood, and his family was like a second home to me. Everything felt peaceful and normal at first, just the kind of escape I needed. But there was something off. Josh's mom, Mary, had always been kind and warm, but lately she seemed different. Her attention toward me had become more frequent, almost too much. Every time I was alone, she'd knock on my door, offer snacks, and stay a little too long in conversation. I told myself it was nothing. She was just being caring. But there was a tension that lingered, something I couldn't explain. It started small, little moments where her smile seemed too knowing, where her touch lingered just a bit longer than usual. I dismissed it as nothing. After all, she was like a mother to me. But soon those small moments built up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One evening, Josh had gone out with friends, and his dad was away on business. The house was quiet, just me and Mary. I was sitting in the living room when she came in, holding a tray of snacks and a drink. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, smiling as she handed me the tray. "Thanks," I said, taking it from her hands. But as I looked into her eyes, I couldn't shake the sense that there was more to this than just kindness. She stood there, a little too close, her eyes never leaving mine. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to break the awkward silence. Mary smiled, but there was something in her smile that sent a chill down my spine. "Just checking on you, Ethan. Your family." I nodded, trying to brush off the unease, but deep down I felt something shifting between us. The night dragged on, and I tried to ignore it, but the tension only seemed to grow. Over the next few days, I started to notice more subtle things I couldn't ignore anymore. Mary's visits became more frequent. She'd come by my room, knock on my door for no reason, and stay for longer than needed. The way she looked at me, it wasn't just the typical concern of a mother. It felt like there was something else there, something hidden just beneath the surface. One evening while I was sitting alone scrolling through my phone, I heard footsteps coming down the hallway. It wasn't Josh. He was out again, and his dad wasn't back yet. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I froze. Was someone there? I waited, heart racing, but the footsteps didn't continue. I was just about to get up when I heard the door creak slightly, then open. There she was, Mary, standing in the doorway, her face calm but her eyes different. There was a coolness to her demeanor now. She wasn't smiling, but her gaze was intense. "Ethan, I thought you might like some company," she said softly, stepping into the room. I was speechless. My mind raced. Why was she standing there? Why was she coming into my room like this? "I'm fine, Mary. Really," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could feel the tension in the air thickening. She didn't move, her eyes locking onto mine. The room seemed to shrink with every passing second. There was no denying it. Something had changed. "I know, but sometimes people need more than just fine," she whispered, her voice low. Her words hung in the air, heavy and full of meaning. She stepped closer, just a little too close. My heart was pounding in my chest as I tried to process what was happening. I knew I needed to pull away, but it felt like I was frozen in place. The following day, I decided to confront Josh. The tension was unbearable, and I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal. It wasn't just my growing unease. It was the feeling that something bigger, something dangerous was unfolding right under my nose. "Josh," I started, my voice shaking, "has your mom been acting strange lately?" Josh looked at me, his eyes widening just slightly, but then he quickly masked it, pretending like nothing was wrong. "What do you mean, strange?" he asked casually, though I could hear the hint of unease in his tone. "I don't know," I said, struggling to find the right words. "She's just been acting different, too friendly, too close." Josh's expression shifted. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought. Then his face hardened, as if he was suddenly afraid of what I might say next. "I think you should leave it alone, Ethan," Josh said, his voice serious. "It's complicated." I wasn't satisfied with that answer. "What's complicated? What's going on?" Before he could respond, Mary entered the room, her presence filling the space in a way that made me uncomfortable. Her gaze flicked from Josh to me, and I saw the slightest flicker of something dark in her eyes. "Is everything okay, boys?" she asked, her voice dripping with sweetness. But there was an edge to it now, something I hadn't noticed before. We both nodded, but the atmosphere had shifted. Mary gave me a long, lingering look, her gaze almost possessive. It felt like she was reading me in a way no one should. The house was eerily quiet, as if it was holding its breath. I couldn't escape the tension that had settled between me and Mary. Every glance she gave me seemed charged, as though there were unspoken words lingering in the air. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something I couldn't control. That night I was in my room again, unable to sleep. My mind raced with everything that had happened over the past few days. Mary's increasing attentiveness, the moments when her touch lingered a bit too long, the strange silence between me and Josh. Everything was building up, and I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Then came the knock. It was softer than before, almost tentative. I didn't answer at first, but the door creaked open anyway. There she was again. Mary. This time she wasn't holding a tray of snacks or offering a drink. She was just standing there, her expression unreadable. "Ethan," she said softly, stepping into the room. I need to talk to you." I stood up from the bed, my heart pounding. I didn't want this. I didn't want to be alone with her again, but somehow I couldn't push her away either. "Mary, what's going on?" I asked, my voice shaking. This isn't like you. What are you doing?" She took a step closer, her eyes searching mine, almost pleading. "I never wanted this to happen. But things have changed between us, haven't they?" Before I could respond, she was already right in front of me, her hand reaching up to touch my cheek. Her fingers were cold against my skin, sending a chill through me, but I didn't move away. There was something in her gaze, something so intense that I couldn't bring myself to pull away. "Ethan, I don't know what's come over me," she whispered, "but I can't ignore how I feel anymore. I never meant for this to happen, but I can't stop it." My mind was screaming at me to stop, to push her away, but I didn't. I couldn't. I didn't know what was happening to me, but the weight of her touch felt too powerful, too overwhelming to resist. In that moment, all the tension, all the confusion seemed to bubble over. Before I knew it, she was kissing me. At first it was soft, hesitant, but it quickly deepened. I didn't know what was happening. My body responded before my mind could catch up. Her hands were on me, pulling me closer, and I didn't pull away. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong, but in that moment I couldn't stop. My mind was a blur of confusion and desire, and I was drowning in it. Everything I had known about family, about trust, about right and wrong, felt like it was crumbling around me. As she led me to the bed, I couldn't find the strength to fight back. She was there, her body pressed against mine, her lips on my neck, and I couldn't stop the flood of emotions. Betrayal, desire, guilt. I felt them all at once, swirling inside me. It felt like I was losing myself, losing everything I had ever known. We were tangled together in a moment of weakness, of passion that neither of us should have allowed. Her hands were everywhere, and I didn't stop her. I didn't stop myself. For that brief, fleeting moment, nothing else existed but the chaos we had created. The lines between right and wrong blurred, and I found myself lost in the feeling. When it was over, there was silence. The kind of silence that felt suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I lay there, my heart racing, my body still tangled in the sheets, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Mary pulled away slowly, her eyes downcast, avoiding mine. She didn't say anything, and neither did I. The weight of what we had done settled heavily between us, and I couldn't help but feel like I had crossed a line I could never come back from. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Neither did I. But it had happened, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed were filled with tension, but there were no words. Neither Mary nor I brought up what had happened. It was like an unspoken understanding hung in the air, but the damage was done. The nights grew longer, and the tension between Mary and me felt like a storm that was brewing, ready to explode. It wasn't just in the way she looked at me anymore. It was in the air. Every time we were in the same room, I could feel the electricity between us. The awkwardness of our shared secret hung heavily between us, but neither of us could find the courage to speak of it. Instead, we danced around each other, pretending that nothing had happened, though everything had changed. It was a Friday night when everything came to a head. Josh had gone out with his friends, and his father was away on business. I had been in my room, aimlessly scrolling through my phone, trying to block out the thoughts that had been consuming me for days. But there was no escaping it anymore. I couldn't push it down. My thoughts kept returning to that moment, the first time Mary had stepped into my room. The first kiss, the lingering touch. That night, Mary knocked on my door again, as if the universe had planned it. I didn't know why I opened it, but I did. When I saw her standing there, I could tell something had shifted in her too. The tension in her eyes was undeniable. "I need to talk to you," she said quietly, her voice unsteady. I nodded, my heart pounding. I knew this conversation was coming. It was inevitable. But I didn't know how it would unfold, what would be said, or what would happen after. She stepped into the room and the door clicked shut behind her. For a moment, we just stood there in silence, staring at each other. I could feel the weight of the past week bearing down on me, the guilt, the need, the confusion. "You don't have to do this," I whispered, though my voice felt small in the silence. I was afraid of what would happen next, of where this would lead. Mary didn't say anything for a moment. Then she took a step closer, her hand reaching out to gently touch my arm. It was an innocent gesture, but the warmth of her skin against mine sent a shiver through me. I had felt this touch before, but this time it was different. It felt heavier, like it meant more than just a casual gesture. "Ethan, I can't keep pretending this isn't real," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I know I'm wrong, but I can't ignore what I feel anymore." I didn't know how to respond. I should have stopped her. I should have pushed her away. But I didn't. My body was betraying me, reacting to the touch I had been craving, the feeling I couldn't control anymore. Before I knew it, she was standing so close that I could feel the heat of her body against mine. She tilted her head slightly, and before I could think, her lips were on mine. It was sudden, but it was inevitable. The kiss wasn't slow or tentative this time. It was urgent, like both of us were trying to make up for lost time. Her hands found their way to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, deepening the kiss. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. I could feel her heartbeat beneath my fingers, could hear her breath quicken in time with mine. Her body pressed against mine, and I felt a surge of desire, a desperate need to give in. I wanted to push her away, but I didn't. The guilt that had been eating away at me vanished for those few moments. It was just us. Just the two of us. As the kiss broke, I could see the same struggle in her eyes. She was just as lost as I was. She stepped back for a moment, but her gaze never left mine. There was a moment of hesitation, a breath between us, and then, without saying anything, she pulled me back to her. This time there was no holding back. She led me to the bed, her hands on my chest, pushing me down gently. My mind screamed at me to stop, to tell her to stop, but I couldn't. I was caught in the whirlwind, and the more I tried to pull away, the more it pulled me in. Her hands were moving swiftly now, unbuttoning my shirt, her lips trailing down my neck. I didn't resist. I couldn't. Every touch, every kiss felt like it was ripping me apart, but I couldn't stop myself. I reached for her, my hands trembling as they touched her skin. She didn't hesitate, didn't pull away. Her breath was hot against my ear as she whispered, "I don't want to fight this anymore." She undid my jeans and I felt the heat between us intensify. Every movement, every inch of her body felt like it was drawing us closer to something we couldn't turn back from. My mind was still screaming, telling me to stop, that this was wrong, but my body was responding in a way that felt like it was beyond my control. She took the lead, guiding me as our bodies came together. I had no words, no thoughts, just the overwhelming feeling of desire, guilt, and confusion. It was like I was drowning, but I couldn't come up for air. There was no escape from the moment. The world around us faded as everything became blurred. Just the heat, the urgency, the confusion of what we were doing. When it was over, I lay there beside her, both of us breathless and still. The silence in the room felt oppressive, like the weight of what had just happened was too much to bear. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what to say. I couldn't even look at her. The guilt was crushing me. Mary rolled over, her hand lightly resting on mine. Her touch was gentle now, but it didn't ease the pain I was feeling. The guilt, the shame, it was all too much. I wanted to say sorry, to apologize for everything we had done, but no words came out. "I don't know what to do, Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted this to happen." I didn't answer. I couldn't. What could I say? What could either of us say now? We both knew that everything had changed, and now we had to live with the consequences. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever experienced. Josh, still oblivious to what had happened, continued to go about his days. But I couldn't look at him without feeling the weight of my betrayal. Every time I saw him, I was reminded of what I had done, of the secret I had shared with his mother. Mary and I avoided each other as much as possible, but the silence between us was deafening. Every time we crossed paths, there was a tension in the air, a heavy, unspoken understanding that we couldn't undo what had happened. The guilt gnawed at me, but I couldn't escape it. It had happened, and now I was living with the consequences of that moment. The distance between Josh and me, the fractured bond between Mary and me, everything was hanging by a thread. And in the quiet moments, when no one was around, I couldn't help but wonder, would things ever go back to the way they were before? But I already knew the answer. The days turned into weeks, and Mary's condition only worsened. She was no longer the woman I had known, the motherly figure who had been there for me in so many ways. Now she was a shadow of that person, consumed by the addiction that had taken hold of her. Her behavior became more erratic. She would disappear for hours, sometimes even days, leaving behind traces of what she was doing, hiding the signs of her downward spiral. I caught her more than once, sitting in the corner of the living room, shaking as she searched for something to ease her pain. I found empty bottles, traces of the powder, evidence that she was sinking deeper into this new reality. I wanted to help, but I was too afraid. I didn't know how to reach her. She had fallen so far, and now it felt like she was slipping further away with each passing day. Her desperation was evident in everything she did. She no longer seemed to care about appearances. She stopped trying to hide her addiction, and when I confronted her, she just broke down in front of me. I can't live with this anymore, Ethan," she sobbed, her voice raw with emotion. "I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm losing everything. You, Josh, me." It was hard to watch. It was heartbreaking. She wasn't just losing control over her actions, but over her entire life. And I was caught in the middle of it all, torn between the guilt of what had happened between us and the empathy I still felt for her. I tried talking to Josh about it, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. How could I? How could I tell him that not only had I betrayed him, but now his mother was slowly destroying herself? I couldn't face him. The shame of what had happened was too much, and I couldn't bring myself to admit what had unfolded. Eventually, the truth came crashing down. Josh confronted Mary one evening when he came home early from a weekend trip. He found her sitting in the kitchen, looking like a shell of the woman she once was. Her eyes were vacant, and her hands trembled as she tried to pour herself a glass of water. He saw the signs. He saw the look in her eyes, the way she was unable to hide the addiction any longer. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, his voice shaking with anger and confusion. "What is happening to you?" She didn't try to hide it this time. The shame was there, but so was the exhaustion, the realization that she couldn't keep running from what had become her reality. "I'm sorry, Josh," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I've been trying to escape. I don't know how to stop. I've ruined everything." Josh stood there for a moment, staring at her, disbelief and hurt flooding his face. It was the first time he had truly seen the full extent of what was happening to her, and it was the first time he understood that she wasn't the same person anymore.